This is Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, welcome to JCT. I'm always delighted to have a little bit of your time, and I value it big time. We are in Mark 14. Just started last program. We're into Passover, or the Passion Week, as it's often referred to. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to take my time with it as I do with everything else. We're going to go through it verse by verse and see what we have to learn.
The Bible tells us that true religion is visiting orphans and widows in their distress. The Bible also says that God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. Heaven's core values for mankind begin with God's heart for the least of these. When you support WOW, you're in the sweet spot of God's heart for the poor. Yes, we're only a small player in this great drama, but at least we're on the field. Please give generously.
I took quite a bit of time last program just describing general parameters of the Passover event as it relates to the calendar. So I'm not going to go there. But I just do want to say this, that Passover, which happened in the spring, March in our terms, but the month of Nisan for the Israelites, Shavuot, or Pentecost, in June, and Sukkot, Tabernacles, in the fall, September, October. These were the three main celebrations or festivals, events that Moses had mandated all Jewish Israelite men to attend in Jerusalem if possible. And so it was a pilgrimage time. Some of the Psalms that were written are called Psalms of Ascent. When I lived in Jerusalem for 7 years, and I can see it as I tell you about this, but to get to Jerusalem, for instance, from the seacoast, you have to climb. To get Jerusalem from the desert, you got to climb. And many times when I'm down, I've been down, say, in Jericho or down the Dead Sea, as I was every week when I was traveling through the Jordan Valley from Jerusalem up to Lebanon to broadcast there. You look up and you can see Jerusalem way, way up there, on the top of the highest hill. And similarly from Tel Aviv, when you got to drive. And it's all switchbacks, and finally you get, so it's called Aliyah, which means going up to Jerusalem. To this day, if you are a Jewish immigrant and you're moving from Europe or Britain or Canada or the States or whatever to Israel, they call it making Aliyah, going up to Jerusalem. Well, a lot of the Psalms that were written are called Psalms of Ascent. They were psalms that pilgrims would sing as they were walking together, and they would often go in huge groups because so many were going, for one thing, but secondly, it was a way of protecting themselves from thieves, of which there were an abundance at that time. And so they would sing these Psalms of Ascent. One of the classics, is it Psalm 48? Should have checked. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, the city of our God, and the mountain of his holiness, beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. And there are so many other Psalms of Ascent that would be sung, okay? So, Passover was a huge deal. This is Jesus' story. Passover is about to happen. Now look at verse 1 again of Mark 14. after 2 days, referring to Wednesday and Thursday, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priest and the... By the way, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was the 7 days after Passover. For Passover, there must be no leaven in your bread, no leaven in your household. You know, when I lived there, for some of the time we lived there, we had an apartment on Mount Scopus, which is where the Hebrew University is, and it's the mountain right next to the Mount of Olives. And I used to walk to my office, which was right in downtown Jerusalem. And I used to walk right through Mea Shearim. Mea Shearim means 100 gates. The quarter, as it's called, where ultra-Orthodox Jews live, in a kind of, almost looks like a Middle Ages time frame in terms of their costumes and their lifestyle and so on. And in the weeks, in the few days previous to Passover, as I would walk through Mea Shearim, I would see these bonfires with these huge kettles, boiling water over the bonfires, and women bringing their utensils to these men who were tending the big kettle. And they would go through kind of a ceremonial cleansing of their kitchen utensils. This was a part of cleansing the house. And as well as doing this, they would get rid of all of the leavened bread, baking soda, cakes, anything that leaven in, out of the house, sweeping it clean. And then they would, position their newly cleansed kitchen utensils. And this is all in preparation for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And for 7 days there after Passover, no leaven was allowed. In fact, when we would go to the grocery stores, and when we lived there, they didn't have big supermarkets like there are now. When we lived there, they were little corner grocery stores called Makolits. Anything on the shelving that had leaven in it would be covered with a shroud. It was too much work to take everything out and then put everything back in, so they would shroud it. This is their bowing to the unleavened component that was required by Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Very interesting. I never really got used to it. Something I found interesting is that, talk about ingenuity. They actually made cakes out of unleavened bread. It's called matzah. It's like a cracker, okay? But they made cakes, layers of matzah, between the layers of matzah, chocolate and various kinds of things. And they would bake it, and it was really good. Man, we loved it. Anyhow, where was I? Sometimes I go off on these things and I forget where I am. Okay, Feast of Unleavened Bread. The chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. Now, they knew Jesus would be there because all males were required to be there. Okay? So even though he was from the Upper Galilee, they knew that he would make the pilgrimage like all of the others did from the Upper Galilee, and he would be there. So they had to come up with a kind of a plot, a kind of a plan to capture him and kill him, put him to death. It's interesting when now in this version it says they might take him by trickery. In the original language, it basically means, I think it's doulos in Greek, it basically means fraud, guile, deceit, subtlety. They had to be clever to kind of trap him, all right? But they wanted to kill him. So that's going on. But they said, not during the feast. Because if we do it, then there will be an uproar among the people. Uproar, we're having uproars right now in our world. All you have to do is go to the internet, any of the news services, or turn on your television, or open a newspaper, and see the recent uproar that has occurred in some major city over some unjust action by the authorities or whatever, or some national leader who wants to set himself up as a despot or already is, and an election has occurred and they don't like the the trickery that was involved in the election, and so there's an uproar, okay? We know about uproar. And this was the thing they wanted to avoid. And an uproar in Jerusalem when you have, maybe 100,000 pilgrims on top of the local population, all there in that very compressed space, uproar was uproar, okay? They don't want that. So while that's going on, Jesus is in Bethany, verse 3, at the house of Simon the leper. Now, what this tells you is that Simon the leper was a latter-day leper. It had obviously come on him at a later time in life, and he was obviously very wealthy and influential, because most lepers lived in caves outside of the city. They were required to do so because they believed that leprosy was communicated through breath. In fact, if you were an innocent, out for a hike through some of the mountains of Judea, and you were approaching a cave where a leper happened to be living, if the leper saw you approaching within, shouting distance, he would have to cover his mouth and cry, "Unclean, unclean," to let you know that he was a leper. So I don't know how Simon was doing this. Maybe he was like King Uzziah, who also was a leper, who was able to stay within the palace compound in Jerusalem. And I suppose it would be like modern day quarantine, self-isolation. But he had enough clout socially, enough money economically, that he was able to stay in his own house. That's the only sense I can make of this. I don't know how. It's possible that the house of Simon the leper may have been a house that was named after Simon, who had become a leper. It's not necessarily the case here that Simon is present in this situation. So we don't know, okay? So there's a lot about Scripture when you're reading it. You have to either, say, I don't know, or there's a mystery here, or just leave it because there's no explanation. Or sometimes in the context, you can kind of read between the lines and figure out what's going on. But we'll just leave it where it is, okay? He's sitting there at table, verse 3, and a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. This would have been kind of like an expensive perfume or ointment, something that was really outstanding. Chanel number 5. I don't know. Fragrant oil, perhaps, is what it was. But whatever it was rare and it was costly because it was worth at least 300 denarii. Okay? 300 denarii. A denarius was a Roman coin. 300 would be worth more than a year's wages for a laborer. Your average laborer made about our equivalent of $1 a day. So $365 a year. This is worth at least that, maybe more. There's some very interesting things going on here. We'll take a little break and we'll get back to it. I'm looking forward to it. Don't miss it.
WOW works with local churches in needy countries. We mobilize those churches, pastors, and volunteers in a concerted effort to care for orphans and widows in their homes and villages. Through that strong faith-based platform, we're able to not only provide food, medicine, and crisis intervention, but we're also able to lead these afflicted ones to faith in God. It's powerful, humbling, and well worth the effort. Please support WOW with your generous gifts and faithful prayer. Thank you.
So let's pick it up here. This unnamed woman is anointing Jesus with this fragrant, expensive oil. And it's met with huge pushback. Now, in Mark's case, he says, some were indignant among themselves. Now, what that means is there was a private conversation going on. And as you know from private conversation, sometimes it's one person who's outraged and there's 3 or 4 listening and affirming the outrage, but not necessarily expressing themselves verbally. We don't know. But what we do know from John, as he talks about this incident in John chapter 12, is that it was Judas who made the fuss. Now, Judas was the money keeper for Jesus' disciples, right? We know that. He kept the money. It might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. They criticized her sharply. Jesus says, look, back off. That's basically what he's saying here, back off. Why are you troubling her? Leave her alone. You know, for those of us who sometimes think that Jesus was meek and mild, Jesus was not meek and mild. Jesus, he drove the money changers out of the temple. You know about that Jesus. Jesus cursed a fig tree, an unproductive fig tree one time. And it wasn't in a low voice. He was outraged at times at the scribes and the Pharisees. He was no wilting flower. Okay? You can be sure he spoke harshly to them here. She's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always. So many people over the centuries have taken that comment as justification for feathering their own nest and neglecting the poor. That's not the point Jesus is making at all. When he says you have the poor always, in many ways, he's quoting what had become a bit of a saying in Jewish culture that goes right back to Deuteronomy chapter 15:11, where Moses made the same comment. The poor are always there, and you can always help the poor. And Jesus wasn't saying, don't help the poor. In fact, if anything, Jesus modeled help of the poor, healing of the poor, caring of the poor. I mean, this was something that Jesus did, and he modeled, he represented. He says, look, I'm not going to be with you always. And what she's done, she's prepared me for my burial. Now, Mark doesn't comment on this. Again, I've made it a point that Mark is, to use a big English word, parsimonious in his use of descriptors. He doesn't use a lot of adjectives. He doesn't use a lot of adverbs. He doesn't give you a lot of detail. He sometimes goes from event to event without any transitions. He's to the point, to the point. So he doesn't say, well, the disciples said, what? Your burial? What are you talking about? Although you can be sure that many of them thought that. But he says, look, Jesus says, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. And isn't that true? Well, I'm reading it right now. I'm talking about it right now. The woman in this case is unnamed. Other gospel writers name her. And sometimes there's suggestion that maybe it was 2 different women on 2 different occasions who did a similar act of anointing. I'm not going there. But Judas, according to John, who had made the big fuss, basically decided enough is enough already. He'd been incubating, probably for some time. He knew that there were efforts to capture Jesus, to arrest him. He knew they wanted to kill him. And we don't know to this day, and I've read all of the various comments from various theologians and Bible historians. What was up with Judas? Was he trying to force Jesus' hand? Was he really, Judas was he was the Judean, and when the Bible refers to him as a Judean, they might as well have said he was the zealot, okay, much more so than the guys from the Galilee who are not from Judea. Right? They were Galileans. Judas was kind of like an outsider from the get-go. Was he trying to force Jesus' hand? Or was he just totally disillusioned with Jesus and fed up with it? There's a suggestion here on the heels of this event that as the keeper of the money, and there is more than a broad suggestion in the Gospels that he dipped into the money for personal use. He just decided, I'm not putting up with this anymore. Whatever the reasons were. And he decides, I'm going to get him to the chief priests. Okay? Verse 10, Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. Now these are the guys who are plotting, right? Secretly, scheming, conniving. Dead end. No plan will work. We've never been able to get the guy. And certainly not now with all of these pilgrims here. And Jesus is more popular than Herod, more popular than Pilate, more popular than the chief priest. He's more popular than anybody. We can't do it now. We got to wait. But how are we going to do it? Judas intrudes on their deliberation by saying, I'll give them to you. They jumped at the opportunity. Suddenly, all of their caution was thrown to the wind. Now they're not talking about the people being upset. Now they're saying, oh, we got him. Let's pay him what you got to pay him. He's obviously doing it for money. Give him the money and let's get Jesus. When they heard it, verse 11, they were glad and promised to give him money. So he sought how he might conveniently, really? Conveniently? Conveniently betray him. Wow. Just let me stop here for a sec. Even though Judas, might have been verbalizing, when Mark says there were a group of them objecting to this extravagance, there's more than money at issue here. There's 3 years spent following this Jesus around. And here he is talking about his burial. Remember a while back he was talking about being crucified, being put to death? Did we get it wrong? I mean, yeah, you can talk about the waste of money here, this year's worth wages, this costly ointment, but what about our waste? I mean, I gave up significant income, Peter might say, or Andrew, or James, or John. I mean, we were fishermen. I mean, we had commercial business going on there. We used to sell our fish to the dealers in Magdala there, and they would, then send them out to the retail market, and we made a good living there. What about our families? I mean, really, my wife, she's still after me every time we get back for a period of time. What in the world am I doing? I'm away from home more than I'm there. My own kids don't have a dad right now because I'm always following this Jesus guy around. What about our comforts? Man, it's fine for him to say foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Well, that's true for us too. I mean, we put up with it. How many times have we camped under the stars? To what end? We thought that he was going to rout the Romans. We thought that we would be his cabinet, that we would be his governors. Now he's making this talk about being buried. Did we get it wrong? Has all this been for nothing? Well, I wonder. And Judas, who was more carnally motivated, money, decides, I'm going to force his hand, or I'm just going to end this story. I've had enough of the waste, and I'll deliver him to these guys who want to kill him, and I'll make a few bucks out of it, and I'll get out of here. This is why Nobody ever wants to call their newborn baby Judas to this day, any more than any American family wants to call their newborn baby boy Benedict Arnold. Well, I know German family wants to call their new boy Adolf. There are certain names that are associated with treachery and wickedness and evil behavior. Judas, perhaps the worst of the lot, in betraying the very Son of God himself. For those of you who are thinking about kicking over the traces and walking away from your Christian faith, think twice. It's not a wise thing to betray the Lord. Not a wise thing to turn your back on him. To walk away and think you'll do better without him than you are with him. And besides, it's not all about you anyway. It's about him, his lordship, and his shepherding and his love for you as his own valued treasure.
Why dance when you have very little? When you live from day to day with food insecurity, rampant disease, sickness, and death? You dance because your heart is full of love for God and your hope is strong. WOW has come alongside as the hands and feet of the Lord, providing both home-based care and assurance of God's love. You're happy and you've got to dance. Please support WOW. Let's keep them dancing.
So friends, I hope you're enjoying this. I enjoy doing it. This is my gifting, my calling, and I've been doing it now for 52 years. Yikes. Do I look that old? I really value your participation as a listener and also as a supporter. And when you ask for Cantelon's Casual Commentary, some of you have already many of these tranches, which I send in sections to you in a little envelope because it's cheap to send, but hopefully not cheap to read. Please ask for it, first of all, and secondly, include your best ministry gift. Together we can really make it happen. Remember that in supporting JCT, you're also supporting WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, which we promote in the body of the program. Our work with orphans and widows who've been impacted by HIV and AIDS and poverty-related issues. We've been doing it now for 21 years. Can you believe it? And by God's grace, we'll continue to do it with your help. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.